Adam and Michael left me at an old age home. They said, "Mom, come with us." I followed them thinking it was just a doctor visit. Then they pointed inside and said, "Go to room 43. The doctor is waiting for you." I remember standing there for a moment, holding my purse, looking at both of them. It didn't feel strange yet, just unfamiliar. I even nodded and said, "Okay, I'll go. Don't be late." They smiled, and then Adam added, "Do you remember your medicines?" I nodded again. "Yes, Adam. I know." That was the last proper conversation I had with them that day. Then they turned and walked away. I stood there watching them for a moment longer, waiting for them to come back. They didn't. So I went inside. I started looking for room 43. I checked one corridor, then another. Every door I passed had names, files, people sitting, but no room 43. At first I thought maybe I was just not seeing properly, but the more I walked, the more confused I became. I stopped a few times and asked people passing by, but no one seemed to understand what I was looking for. And then I saw another woman. She looked around my age. She noticed me standing there and asked gently, "Are you a new admission?" I didn't understand her question, so I asked back, "New admission?" "No, I'm here for the doctor, room 43, for a checkup." For a moment, she just looked at me, then she laughed softly, not in a cruel way, but in a way that made me feel small without knowing why. "Did your sons drop you here and tell you to go to room 43? She asked. I hesitated. Then I said, "Yes, Adam and Michael." She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she called another woman over. They spoke quietly for a moment, and then both of them looked at me, and they laughed, not loudly, but enough for me to hear. And for a moment, I just stood there not knowing what to say, because I suddenly realized I wasn't looking for a doctor. I was just waiting for them to come back. But this didn't start that day. It started much earlier, in a house I once believed I would never leave. Before I continue, tell me something. Where are you watching this from? And if you are still listening, then maybe you'll understand why this moment still stays with me. My name is Sophia. I'm 65 years old, and for most of my life, I never imagined being alone. I lived in that house for more than 40 years with my husband, Jordan. It wasn't big, not impressive, but it held everything that mattered to us. He used to sit by the window every evening, just watching the light fade. I used to ask him, "What are you thinking about?" And he would say, "Nothing, just watching time go." I never understood that. Now I think he was just trying to hold on to moments a little longer. That was Jordan. Quiet, steady, the kind of person you don't realize you depend on until they're gone. When he got sick, we didn't accept it at first. We thought it was just age catching up. But then came the hospital visits, the tests, and the silence after every doctor spoke, until one word changed everything. Cancer. We fought it for months. He never complained. Even when it got worse, he still asked me if I had eaten, if I had rested. One day I asked him, "Why are you still worrying about me?" He just smiled. That smile stayed with me long after October 2015, the day I lost him. After that, the house didn't feel empty immediately. It still felt like he was there, just not visible. But slowly, silence started spreading through everything. Not peaceful silence, the kind that makes you notice what's missing. People began telling me I shouldn't stay alone anymore. At my age, it wasn't safe. And that's when Adam and Michael started coming more often. At first, it felt like care. They brought groceries, fixed things, sat with me in the evenings. If you are listening to this, maybe you know this feeling too. When concern looks exactly like love, that's what it felt like. Mom, you shouldn't stay alone, Adam said one evening. It's better if you stay with us, Michael added. I didn't argue. They were my sons. Why would I doubt them? But then the words started repeating, not loud, not forceful, just constant. This house is too big. You don't need all this space. You'll be safer with us. Comfortable. That word started following me everywhere. One night after they left, I walked through every room slowly. Everything was still the same. But I wasn't. For the first time, I started seeing my own home the way they saw it. Too big, too quiet, too much for one person. And that thought didn't feel forced. It felt like mine. That's how it started. Not with pressure, not with force. But I didn't realize that thought wasn't really mine. A few weeks later, they asked me to make a decision that would change everything. And I thought I was choosing safety. I didn't know. They didn't ask me to sign anything right away. That's what I want you to understand. It didn't happen in one conversation. It didn't happen with pressure or raised voices. It happened the way water shapes a stone, slowly, quietly, without you ever noticing the damage. It started with small things. Adam would mention the property taxes, how much maintenance an old house needed. Michael would talk about the neighborhood, how it had changed, how it wasn't as safe as it used to be. And I would listen. Because they were my sons, and I thought, they know these things better than I do. One evening, Adam sat beside me and placed a paper on the table. Mom, this is just an estimate, he said. What the house could sell for. We're not saying you have to. We just want you to know. I looked at the number. It meant nothing to me. What meant something was Jordan's chair still sitting by the window, the small crack on the kitchen wall we never fixed, the garden he planted and never saw fully bloom. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I asked, where will I go? And Michael smiled, the way you smile at a child who asks a simple question. With us, Mom, you'll stay with us. 1 week here, 1 week there. You'll never be alone. I looked at both of them, and I signed. I want to tell you what I thought I was choosing that day. I thought I was choosing family. I thought I was choosing to not be a burden. I thought I was being practical, the way Jordan always told me to be. What I didn't know was that the moment I signed, something shifted. Not immediately, not obviously, but I felt it. The first few weeks were fine. They included me in meals, asked me how I slept, called me into conversations. But slowly, like that water on stone again, things began to change. I started noticing that when guests came, no one introduced me. I started noticing that my opinion was asked, but never really heard. At Adam's house, I learned quickly which chair was mine, which shelf I could use, which hours of the day I was expected to stay in my room so the children could do their homework in quiet. At Michael's house, it was different, but the same. I folded my own sheets every morning before anyone woke up, so I wouldn't be a reminder that I was there. I learned to eat whatever was left. I learned to laugh when they laughed, even when I didn't understand the joke. I learned to be grateful for every small kindness, as if kindness was now something I had to earn. One evening at Michael's house, his wife was on the phone with a friend. I wasn't trying to listen, but the walls were thin, and I heard her say, "She's here again this week. I don't know how long we can keep doing this. I was sitting in the next room, holding a cup of tea that had already gone cold. I didn't move. I didn't say anything. I just sat there, holding that cup, thinking about Jordan's chair by the window, about the garden, about the crack in the kitchen wall that I never thought to photograph before they sold everything. And for the first time since October 2015, I cried. Not for Jordan. I cried for myself, because I finally understood. I hadn't chosen family that day. I had traded the only place in the world where I had belonged. But even that wasn't the lowest point. Because a few weeks later, Adam called a family meeting. And when I walked into that room, I realized I hadn't been invited to it. I was the subject of it. I had heard voices from the hallway and assumed it was the television. But when I pushed the door open, everyone went quiet at the same time. Adam, Michael, both their wives. 4 faces turning toward me with the same expression. Not guilt, not surprise, just a pause. The kind that tells you the conversation was about you. "Mom," Adam said, pulling out a chair. "Come sit, we were just talking." I sat down, and I waited. But then Michael leaned forward with a smile I hadn't seen in a while. Wide, genuine, the kind he had as a boy when he was about to share something exciting. "We're planning a trip," he said. "Europe, 2 weeks, both families together." The children's school holidays had aligned. Both brothers had taken annual leave. They had been planning it quietly for months and had finally confirmed everything. The table came alive, cities were named, hotels discussed. The grandchildren's excitement was described in detail. And I sat there listening, feeling the warmth of it, thinking, this is nice. This is what I used to imagine when they were small. The whole family together, happy, planning something. Then Michael looked at me. "We thought about you too, Mom." Something lifted in my chest. "But at your age, the long flights, the walking, the time zones, we didn't want you to suffer through it just to be with us." He said it gently, carefully, the way you decline someone kindly so they don't feel rejected. Adam nodded. Both their wives smiled, the kind of smile that is really just polite distance, and the thing that had lifted in my chest came quietly back down. I smiled and said, No, you're right. I would only slow you down." I said it myself, so they wouldn't have to. In the morning they left, I stood at the door and waved until both cars had turned the corner and disappeared. Then I stepped back inside and closed the door. I found a note on the kitchen counter in Adam's handwriting. "Water the plants, collect the mail. Mrs. Thomas next door has a spare key." I read it twice, then I folded it and put it in my pocket. Not because I needed to remember the instructions, but because it was the only thing in that house addressed to me. For 2 weeks, I moved through their rooms carefully, quietly. I watered their plants on schedule, collected their mail and stacked it neatly, cooked small meals for myself and ate at the corner of their large dining table. I washed my own dishes immediately after eating, so there would be no sign I had used anything. I don't know exactly when I started doing that, making myself small inside someone else's home, leaving no trace, but I had become very good at it. There is a particular kind of loneliness that has nothing to do with being alone. It is the loneliness of being present but unnecessary, of existing in a space where nothing requires you, where you could disappear for a day and the plants would still survive. the mail still pile up neatly, the kitchen still stay clean. I thought about Jordan during those 2 weeks, about our house, his chair by the window, the crack in the kitchen wall we never fixed. In that house, I had never once felt like I was taking up too much space. Now I felt like old furniture, still here, still functional, but chosen by no one. And when they returned, they were tanned and full of stories I wasn't part of. That same evening, Adam mentioned a doctor's appointment he had made for me. Just a routine checkup, Mom. Nothing to worry about. I nodded and said I would be ready. That night, I ironed my good coat and set it by the door, because I thought I was coming back. I had no reason not to. They had been quieter than usual that morning. I didn't notice it then. I was focused on my coat, making sure it sat right on my shoulders, making sure I looked presentable for the doctor. Adam drove. Michael sat beside him. I sat in the back the way I always did, watching the streets pass. I remember thinking the route seemed unfamiliar. But I told myself I simply didn't know this part of the city well. When we stopped, I looked out the window at the building. It was large, quiet, the kind of building that doesn't announce what it is. Adam turned around from the front seat and smiled. "We're here, Mom." Michael opened my door for me, helped me out, held my arm as we walked toward the entrance. That part I remember clearly. He held my arm, like a son who cares. At the entrance, Adam stopped and said, "Go inside, Mom, room 43. The doctor is waiting for you." I looked at both of them. "Aren't you coming in?" "We'll park the car," Adam said. "Go ahead. We'll be right behind you." I nodded. I adjusted my coat one more time, and I walked inside. The corridor was long and smelled of something clean and institutional. People moved slowly. Some sat in chairs along the walls, looking at nothing in particular. I told myself it was just a busy clinic. I started looking for room 43, one corridor, then another, doors with names on them, a common room with a television playing to no one, a nurse who smiled at me without stopping. I checked my watch. I walked further. No room 43. I stopped an attendant and asked. She looked at me with an expression I didn't understand and said she would send someone to help me. And then I saw them. 2 women sitting near the window at the end of the corridor, both around my age. One was knitting. The other was watching me with the quiet attention of someone who had seen this before. As I approached, the one watching me spoke first. "Are you a new admission?" she asked gently. "No," I said. "I'm here for the doctor. Room 43. My sons dropped me off. They're just parking the car." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "Room 43 doesn't exist, dear." I didn't understand her. So I said, "I'm sorry?" She looked at her friend. Something passed between them, not cruelty, but recognition. The tired recognition of a truth they had both lived. And then they laughed, softly, briefly, but enough. I stood there holding my purse, and something inside me went very still, not understanding, not yet. I turned and looked back at the entrance. The doors were closed. I waited for them to open, for Adam to walk through straightening his jacket the way he always did, for Michael to follow behind him saying sorry for the wait. They didn't come. A minute passed, then another. The woman who had spoken stood up slowly and touched my arm. "Come," she said. "I'll take you to the front desk." I followed her. but part of me was still standing at that entrance, still waiting. At the front desk, a woman checked her register and looked up at me with practiced kindness. "Mrs. Sophia?" she asked. I nodded before I understood why she already knew my name. "Your room is ready. Your sons completed the admission paperwork this morning." I heard the words. I understood each one individually. But together, they refused to form a meaning I could accept. I said, "There must be a mistake. I'm here for a checkup. My sons are parking the car." She looked at me with that same practiced kindness and said nothing. And in that silence, I heard everything. I didn't cry at the front desk. I didn't cry when they showed me to my room. Small, clean, a window facing a garden I didn't recognize. I sat on the edge of the bed in my good coat and I thought, no, not Adam, not Michael. They wouldn't. I had carried them, fed them, stayed up through their fevers, watched them become men. Sons don't do this, not mine. There was an explanation. There had to be. Maybe the paperwork was precautionary. Maybe they were coming back to explain. Maybe this was temporary, just until things settled. I kept my coat on for 2 more hours, sitting on the edge of that bed, waiting. It was evening when the woman from the corridor knocked on my open door. She stood there with 2 cups of tea. "The second one is yours," she said, "if you want it." I looked at her for a moment. Then I moved over on the bed so she could sit. Her name was Margaret. And that cup of tea, offered without pity, without explanation, was the first honest kindness I had received in longer than I could remember. I didn't know it then, but that small moment was the beginning of everything that came after. Margaret never asked me why I was still wearing my coat. She just placed the tea beside my bed and sat quietly. I think she understood that some things need to stay untouched for a little longer. We didn't talk much that first week, but we were present for each other. And that, I was learning, is sometimes its own kind of language. She had been at the home for 8 months before I arrived. Her daughter had brought her with a suitcase already packed. No pretense of a doctor's appointment, no room 43, just, "This is better for you, Mama," and then the door closing behind her. One evening, Margaret and I were sitting in the common room after dinner. The television was on, but neither of us was watching it. She looked at me and said, "What did you used to cook, at home?" It seemed like such a small question, but it didn't feel small. "Everything," I said. "Jordan always said I cooked too much, enough for a family even when it was just the 2 of us." She smiled. Then she said something I have thought about many times since. "Then maybe you were always meant to feed more people than the ones you knew." This clicked me. One afternoon, Margaret spread some papers on the table. "The NGO that supports this home has a small fund for residents who want to start something." I was 65 years old. I had given away my house. I had been left at a front desk by my own sons. And yet, I was serious. We wrote the proposal together over 4 evenings. A small food kitchen, just real food. Home food. The kind that tastes like someone thought about you before they cooked it. The NGO approved the funding within 2 weeks. We started small. A counter, 6 tables, a menu written by hand. Margaret handled the accounts. She had worked in a bank for 30 years. I handled the kitchen. Word spread the way good things sometimes do, without us trying. A journalist came one Tuesday and wrote about 2 women in their 60s running the most quietly beloved kitchen in the state. We didn't read it as a triumph. We read it as something simpler. Proof that we were still here, that we had not disappeared. One morning, the home warden knocked on my door. "Mrs. Sophia, 2 men are at the front. They say they are your sons. I sat with that for a moment. Then I stood. Tell them, I said, that she is not here. She is at the hospital. She went for her checkup. She is waiting for her sons in room 43. The warden didn't understand, but she nodded and left. I walked to the kitchen. Margaret was already there, chopping onions with the calm she brought to everything. I said nothing. She asked nothing. I tied on my apron and picked up a knife, and we cooked. I didn't build something to prove a point to my sons. I built it because Margaret asked me what I used to cook, and I realized I still had an answer. Jordan used to sit by the window watching time go. I used to wonder why he didn't do more with it. Now I think I understand. Some moments are not for doing. They are for holding, for being still enough to feel the weight of what you have, before time asks you to keep moving. I am Sophia. I am 65 years old. I was left at a front desk with my coat on, and I am still here. If this story hits you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and share it. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.